Good morning. I hope that you have found us successfully and that you are waiting there in your pajamas in the rain for one of the best Bible studies you will ever attend. I'm Debbie Stewart. I'm the women's minister at Green Acres Baptist Church, and you are a part of mental health and emotional wellness. Maybe some of you are joining us for the very first time, and we're thrilled that you have come in and jumped in our group. This is week 4, so there are 3 previous weeks that are available for you to preview and to watch along with the handouts on our website at greenacreswomen.org. So we're going to give just a few moments as women are finding us today. This is a new place that we're in. This is a new thing that we're doing. The Bible says that the mind of man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. So the Lord has directed us from meeting here on campus and on site to meeting online. We want to be sure that we are as safe and healthy as possible, so we have moved online. We have not canceled. So you will continue, hopefully, to join us for the next 2 weeks after this. So we have July the 7th today. We have July the 14th, and we will conclude on July the 21st. We have so much to bring you. You'll be hearing from Ken Brumley. You'll be hearing from several other speakers, a dear friend of mine in the area that you're going to hear her story. So it's going to be packed the next 3 weeks. If you are having any trouble at all, or if your friend is texting you and say, I can't find it, or any trouble finding our resources, you can call Mimi Youngblood. Mimi is our assistant. She is standing by at her desk. Her number is 903-525-1141. You can call Mimi if you can't find resources, if your friend is having trouble connecting, 903-525-1141. I wanted to give you a few details of things that are going to be important for you to know. Our fall friendship dinner, you saw a slide about that. That's coming in September. That's September the 1st, but we're having a hostess dinner training next week on the 14th. All of that will have to be video, so we're going to work those up and send those to you. All right, today we have several things we're going to get to. Let me tell you about handouts. Today we have several, and we want to tell you where they're located. Right now, if you have joined us, you are in our Facebook group, Mental Health and Emotional Wellness, and you can find all of the handouts under Files. They're also available on our website. I'll tell you how to get there in a moment. But today we have 4 different handouts that you're going to want to pull. First is our scriptures. Each week we give you a page of scriptures that reinforce the message. You can cut and paste those on index cards or put them in your 3-ring binder, but you're going to want to begin committing God's word to memory. You're going to want to use his word during prayer and during your practical daily living, your daily life. We also have coping skills. More to come on that from Amy Waters. What to do when you don't know what to do. Anxiety and depression. Lots of things are available for you in this Facebook group under Files. You will find all of the handouts. You'll also find the handouts on our website, greenacreswomen.org. You can scroll down till you see about the middle of the page, Teaching and Training. Click on Teaching and Training. 2 options come up. Resources. That's where you will find all of the handouts. You will find handouts from 2 years ago. So when we look up our handouts, if you will find those under resources, you will also see videos. That's where all of the videos are archived. So today's video will also be sent out to you in an email on Wednesday. So if you've not registered for the group, if you are not receiving weekly emails from us, please give us a call, 903-525-1141, or email Mimi, M-I-M-I-Y. So that's Mimi, and then Y. That's the first letter of her last name, at mail.gabc.org. M-I-M-I-Y at mail.gabc.org. And we can get you on our mailing list because each Wednesday we send out a link to this video from today, and we will also attach all of the handouts. So I hope that you are prepared. Let us hear from you. Where are you joining us? Maybe sitting in your pajamas in Maine. We know some women are joining us from the Maine area. Let us hear from you. Yakima, Washington. Other women are joining us from that area all across the United States. It is our great privilege, it is our great pleasure to bring to you mental health and emotional wellness. So please let us know how we can serve you. Today, I am excited about our speakers that are going to share a great word with you. When our grandson Clark was about 3 years old, 2 and 3 years old, obviously he did not have words. He couldn't use words, but he could pitch a fit. He could cry and he could scream. And so my daughter and son-in-law taught him sign language so that he could communicate what he wanted and what he needed. So until he could develop those words, he began to use sign language. And then when he was about 3 and he wanted certain things and he would just cry or point, my daughter would say to him, Clark, use your words. Use your words. That's what today's session is going to teach you to do. Our pastor's wife, Cindy Dykes, is here with her daughter, Laura Grace, to share with you part of the journey that they have been on through anxiety, through depression. Laura Grace has written a book entitled Confessions of a Chronic Depressive, a record of struggle and perseverance. I could not put the book down. I read it in one sitting. Here's why I loved it. She put words to depression. She put words to some things that I was feeling that I did not know how to communicate. Oh, I could pitch my fit and I could scream and cry, but we've got to put words to our feelings and deal with our emotions in a healthy place. And you have come to a healthy place. I know we're not gathered here together, but you have joined this group and it's a healthy place to be. So as I introduce to you our pastor's wife, Cindy Dykes, and Laura Grace. Let me tell you just a little bit about Laura Grace. Laura Grace grew up in the Tyler, Texas area, and after college, she lived various places around the country and returned to Tyler in 2017 with her 11-year-old daughter, Ada. Laura Grace is an academic advisor at UT Tyler in the College of Arts and Sciences. She enjoys writing and cooking, laughing, and learning how to play the guitar. And we are thankful for their journey and how the Lord has led them through a very difficult season. So you're going to enjoy hearing both sides of their story, both of their perspectives. So let me pray for you, and then you will get to hear from Cindy and Laura Grace. Father, all across America, we are gathered and our heads are bowed because we are dependent upon you. We humble ourselves before you this morning and ask that you speak. Your word says, speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. I pray that you will give us a time free of distraction where we can focus our heart and our minds on these words that you have to help us and to strengthen us today. Your word says, draw near to you. If we draw near to you, you will draw near to us. And we will be, if we seek you, you will be found by us. And that's what we're doing today. So I pray that in our homes privately, that your presence would be right there with us, leading us and guiding us through our sessions today. In your name I pray, amen. All right, Miss Cindy and Laura Grace, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for speaking to the women about this issue. We appreciate you very much.
It is our pleasure. We are so glad to be here with you today and to share our story of Laura Grace's struggle with depression. I want to introduce myself, Cindy Dykes. I'm the pastor's wife here at Green Acres. I have 2 daughters. My oldest daughter is Jenny, but today we're going to focus on Laura Grace, my youngest daughter. Let me give you a little background on this child. This person was a person that wanted to do her own thing from the very beginning. She was very smart. I would say, Laura Grace, do you have a spelling test today? And she said, I do. Did you study? No, but it's okay, Mother, because I'll make an A. And she always did. She always did. We had a great relationship. She was a fun person. She loved to dress exactly how she wanted to dress. It drove her older sister crazy. Didn't bother me at all. She always was an original, one-of-a-kind person. But our journey as mother and daughter has really been a wonderful journey. She was one that was easy to discipline. She was always very on time and responsible. That's what I remember about Laura Grace in those younger years when she was there. So I am happy to introduce myself as Laura Grace's mother and the caretaker, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Laura Grace?
So, good morning. I'm Laura Grace. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder in 2001 at the age of 19. Over the last 20 years, we've kind of realized that this is a recurring, kind of severe condition that I have dealt with just throughout the last 20 years. In the times that I have been too sick to take care of myself, my mom has been my main caretaker. And really done a lot of the heavy lifting. Debbie mentioned that I wrote a book about my experience with depression, and that was really, therapeutic for me, and I enjoy taking time to share my journey and maybe some of the things that I've learned. So when Debbie asked us to do this talk today, my mom and I went and met with her. And we both just kind of asked her, what do you want us to say? And as Debbie was talking to us, she said, what do you do when you don't know what to do? And that question really stuck out to me, and it stuck out to my mom, and we decided to make that kind of the central focus of our talk today. So today, we're gonna go through 3 different moments in my journey with depression, and try to answer that question from our differing perspectives. What do you do when you don't know what to do? We thought that we would start today with the initial event that led to my diagnosis with depression. This was in 2001, and we're kind of titling this part 1, Shock and Trauma. So in 2001, I was in the 2nd semester of my freshman year of college, and I attempted suicide at that time. I had probably been depressed for at least a year leading up to that, but it was undiagnosed. I didn't know that that's what was happening to me. I didn't know what was happening to me. My family didn't realize that that's what was happening. They knew something was different, but none of us could really put our finger on it. I became kind of secretive and withdrawn, and toward the end, before the suicide attempt, I had stopped eating. I'd stopped sleeping. I wasn't going to class. I wasn't showering. I was paranoid, afraid, sad, detached, delusional. And one day, that just led to me taking all the over-the-counter medication in my dorm room when I was in a major moment of crisis. And at that time, I called my parents. And I did not tell them what I was doing, but I called them just very distraught. I needed to talk to them, hear their voices. And I was very distraught, and my mother said, we're on our way. And immediately, they drove 2 hours, came to get me. At that time, I was still very distraught, and I told them that I had taken all of those pills, and we went to the hospital. We stayed for 3 days, and then we came back to Tyler, and we had to figure out how to move forward from there. And that's where the journey healing from depression really began. It was a really hard time. I was very broken, hurting, traumatized, having panic attacks. I dealt with self-harm, agoraphobia, and spent a lot of time just starting therapy. So what did I do when I didn't know what to do? After my diagnosis with depression, when I was at just a really low place, I absolutely did not know what to do because I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to be or do. I just wanted everything to be over because it was hard. But I was alive, and my family wanted me alive, and they were putting in a lot of effort to make sure that I stayed alive. And so what I did is I rested. I allowed myself the time and space to rest. I did not have the energy or the health to work or go to school or make friends or do anything. I just needed to rest and heal. And so I went to therapy, and I slept, and I ate, and I painted, or just spent time outside at the lake. It was a time for me to rest and heal and find peace because my head felt like a storm. At that time in my life, I first became familiar with Psalm 131, which says, "O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore." In 2001, this psalm was a broken and humbled prayer for me. I had just been beaten down to what I felt like nothing. And I just had to trust that where I was God telling me, rest, heal, and there will be something beyond this. And I just had to believe that there would be something after the rest. And so that was really the first step for me, was just stopping, allowing that I was sick, and letting myself start healing.
All of that's so true, Laura Grace. And this was all a complete shock to us. Being a person who'd never dealt with anyone with any mental illness, we did not see the signs and recognize the things that, when I look back now, isn't hindsight wonderful? I look back now and I realize all the things that were leading up to that one point in 2001. I would have conversations with her, but she really didn't respond. When she went off to college, there would be days that she would not email me back or call me on the phone, return my calls. I think those are the days before cell phones, right? So
Yeah, I didn't have a cell phone.
Okay. We didn't text or anything, but she was so moody. That was another one, which I thought was just a teenager, a growing girl, freshman in college. We took a family trip to London and to Paris for 2 weeks. That was their graduation trip for her and Jenny, and she was very moody and hard to deal with on that trip. But you know what? So was David. So we just made the best we could. We had a great trip. But anyway, when she called that afternoon, it was God's provision in our life, because David and I already had our bags packed. We were headed to Fort Worth for a night at the Kimball Museum just to see the exhibit there and just have a little break. So the bags are in the car. David is at the back door waiting for me, and as I'm walking toward the back door, the telephone rings, and it's Laura Grace. And just a mother's instinct, I knew something was not right, and I just said, "We're on our way." And we got in the car and drove straight to where she was. That was God's provision for us to be there, ready, on go, because if we had delayed much longer, we don't know what might have happened. So now she comes home after those 3 days in the hospital, and I have her 24/7 every day, and I don't know how to deal with this. So what did I do? I did what I call quiet action. I just did the next thing. I'm known around here as the unmerciful counselor, because if you ask me something without any counseling training, obviously I tell you the truth. So that's my thing. But I couldn't tell Laura Grace the truth and all because I didn't know how. So I cleaned the house. I'd be cleaning bathrooms at 2 o'clock in the morning. I cooked because she needed to eat steady food. We did things like work in my garden, which wasn't a fun thing for her, but it was for me. It was my salvation. And then some nights she would be so bad, I would simply crawl into bed with her. There weren't words, and there didn't need to be. Just my presence of being there. And in this time, I was hurting too. But I was smart enough to allow my friends to help me. Now, my friends who really know me know that I'm a private person and I don't share a lot or tell a lot. And so they honored that. I would go to the door and find flowers on the door. I would get cards. I would get emails that would tell me no need to respond. I would have people leave a message on my phone who'd say, I'm bringing you dinner tonight. That would be it. So I allowed my friends to help me through this time. And we questioned. That was a big thing for David and I. We questioned so much. Did we do the right thing as parents? Where did we go wrong? And we talked about it for days and days until we came to the realization that we had done the best we could as parents. But there comes a time in a life when a young adult makes their own choices, or a brain who's not well makes choices for this person. And so what were we to do now? Just start from where we were, love her, provide a secure place for her to live in, and make sure she gets all the help that she needs. And that's what we did. And let me just throw in something too. There were a couple of negative things during this time. You know, as Christians, we don't always say the right thing. We think we're doing good and we think we're holy and all, but let me just tell you, if you've never been in a person's situation, just don't even comment. Just love. That's the best thing you can do. I had one lady in church. I had come to church. Laura Grace was not coming to worship at that time, and she came up to me and said, I tell you, if you would just make her come to church and be with all these people, she would be well. Well, great. I'm glad you think that, but that was not. And thank the good Lord, I was able to say, well, thank you for your advice and move on. Another thing I learned about myself during this time, as I said, I'm a private person, but also I thought, perhaps I need to reach out. Perhaps I need to be a part of a group of people. So a new group was forming of young moms who had children with mental illnesses. There were 10 of us there the first night. And as we met, each person shared their story around the table about their child and their situation, where they were. And it came my turn. I was the last one. And as I began to share my story, one lady in the group, who happened to be a member of our church, said, just right out loud, I cannot believe my pastor's wife is saying this. To me, that was just a big red flag waving in my face, and I knew immediately, I don't need to be sharing this with other people. At this time, I need to pull in. It's going to be the 4 of us, our family unit, and God. And that's what we did during that time. And here's an interesting thing. My verse for the year was Zephaniah 3:17. It reads as this: the Lord is in your midst. The mighty one will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. I couldn't believe that God was rejoicing over me with gladness and singing, but I knew he was quieting me with his love. All right.
Okay,
Let's move on.
part 2.
Yes.
Part 2, we're going to move forward 6 years to 2007. We titled part 2, Fear and Anxiety. In 2007, this moment takes place in the fall of my 3rd year of graduate school in Norman, Oklahoma. I had struggled with depression in between 2001 and 2007, off and on, sometimes worse than others, but the first 2 years of graduate school had been great. 2005 to 2007 had been pretty good. But by the fall of 2007, I was in my last year of my master's program, and I was teaching freshman composition at the University of Oklahoma. I had built a life I was really proud of doing these things. But by that fall, I had really been struggling for months with, again, depression and anxiety. And anxiety, I had dealt with panic attacks in 2001 pretty severely, and agoraphobia. In 2007, the anxiety was all-consuming. Panic attacks were a problem, but just the generalized undercurrent of fear and anxiety was constant. It caused me to have months of stomach problems. For a long time, I could hardly eat anything. It was, do you remember baby carrots and one specific kind of granola bar? For weeks, that's all I could stomach. And I was fearful and irrational. I wanted to just stay in this one spot on my couch. And I even like rearranged my furniture to minimize how much I had to move my body. That's how obsessive and paranoid and afraid and uncomfortable I was. I needed to minimize all kinds of interaction and stimulation. And I was really about to lose the life that I had built. I was not going to be able to teach or complete my classes, keep up my house. And so my mom came up and she stayed with me in my 1-bedroom apartment in Norman, Oklahoma for 6 or 7 weeks. She cooked, she cleaned, she drove every day. We would get up. She would drive me to campus. 2007, I'm 26 years old at this point.
It's okay.
She would drive me to campus, and we would go, and she would stay on campus with me all day. She would do her own thing when I was teaching or in class, and then when I would get out of class, we would meet at my office, and I would just lose it for 20 minutes from having to be on for an hour or two. Was so exhausting that we would go into my office, I would just sob with relief for 20 minutes, and then Mother would go, okay, what's next? Do we need to go to the grocery store? You have this appointment at 3 o'clock, so what can we do before then? And she just walked me through every single step of every day until I could start doing it again on my own. And she did that by leaving her life behind. Just said, okay, I'm leaving, I'm going there for weeks, and I'll come back when I can. And so what did I do at that moment when I didn't know what to do? I was really paralyzed by fear, by the depression and anxiety, and then on top of that, the fear that everything that I had worked so hard for since healing in 2001, that I was gonna lose it, that depression was gonna take everything from me again. And I didn't know what to do about it. I did not feel strong enough to deal with it myself. And so what I did was I trusted. My mom came up, and I just trusted that she was gonna help me. I trusted that when she told me I was worth getting better, and when she told me I could get better, I did not believe those things, but I trusted that they were true because she told me they were true. And because she walked with me down the path to get to those things. Matthew 10:29-31 says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs on your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." At this time when I was consumed by fear, really unable to escape this on my own, I just trusted my mom, and I trusted that she was with me, she was going to walk me through, and that God was going to see us through this next moment. And I didn't know how, but she hopefully knew how, and she got us through.
We did it, didn't we? It was an interesting time through that year, 2007. I'll tell you what, I had a great fear in my life, and to me, it was a very selfish fear. I told the Lord, I just cannot believe that you are going to make my child like this for the rest of her life, and I'm going to have to take care of her. Very selfish, but very realistic. And so what was my response to that was to sacrifice. So because you're feeling selfish about this, let's just be selfless, completely selfless. So I don't even know why or how I got to OU that year, but I just moved in. And it was a point in Laura Grace's life when she's really low, like she was at that time. She cannot function. She can't do her own laundry. She can't cook. She can't eat. She has money in the bank to pay bills, but she can't write the check. Just very basic things, and those were all things that I could do. So I can remember before I met you on campus, I went to your apartment first, and I could hardly open the door because there were weeks of clothes everywhere. She had just gotten where she would put on clothes to go teach her class, then she would come home and just throw them in the floor until the next time when she would pick up something else and then come home and just throw it in the floor. So my first day there, I remember doing 13 loads of laundry, that. And then I went to the grocery store, just basic things. In other words, I just did what had to be done. I was the behind the scenes person. Doing mundane things. An interesting thing about my time at OU, I would go on campus, and when she would go to teach, I would just sit out and watch the kids. I love college campuses, so that was a healing time for me to just sit in the beauty of the Oklahoma campus and see all the people and lives going on around me. Another thing was we went early every morning, and we went to the English department where our office was, and it got to the point about through those 7 weeks that I was making the coffee for the whole English department. So I would get up and get there and make all the coffee. And then the word got around that my husband was divorcing me and I was moving in with Laura Grace. So when she came to tell me that, I said, let's just let them think that. That's perfect. And I even got asked out by one of the English professors. It was most unusual. But anyway, the verse I lived during that time was, in returning and rest, you will be saved. This is from Isaiah 30:15. And then it goes on. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. And I like the way the Message says it. Your strength will come from settling down in complete dependence on me. And that's what I did. My family unit and the Lord held together by His grace and mercy. And we made it through.
We did.
We did. All right, part
Okay,
3.
Part 3.
Mm-hmm.
So part 3 is a little different in that we are taking the last 8 years and talking about them in part 3.
Mm-hmm.
So between 2007 and 2012, I got married. I had a baby. I lived in multiple states.
Yes.
I did a lot in that time period, just kind of trying to figure out where is my life going to land. And in 2011, I moved to Washington State, which is so different from having grown up in the South. That first year that I lived in Washington State, I had another severe depressive episode. The first winter in Washington was really hard for me weather-wise. Being very susceptible to depression, I am also very sensitive to light. So the months where we didn't have a lot of sunlight, it was disorienting for me to the point of really worsening my depression. And there I was in Washington State. I was isolated from friends and family, cut off. We didn't have money or anywhere to go, and I had a toddler. And my job was to be all alone in a state far away, taking care of a toddler while being depressed. So it was difficult. I became very depressed and again, suicidal. And I lost all self-value. I didn't believe that I was worthy of being alive. I thought I was horrible, a terrible mother, a terrible person, and all of this just made me obsessive about the fact that I should no longer be alive. And for months, I just lived with that fear and pain. And then after months of doing that, I came home. I came home to Tyler. I knew that I could not stay alive where I was. Mm-hmm. And so I came home in 2012. And for 4 months, I lived on the Green Acres Lake property in a cabin with my toddler and healed. Again, I took time to rest and heal and relearn how to keep a house, relearn how to cook and clean and take care of my daughter and live a happy-ish life. I went to a lot of therapy at that time, and in the 2012 therapy time period is when I had a very huge breakthrough for me. And that was when I learned that depression doesn't own me. I live with it. I will statistically deal with it my entire life. But it doesn't own me. I'm a person outside of it, and it may have impacted every major event in my adult life for the last 20 years, but I am separate from it. And so that was a huge realization for me because it gave me permission to try to live a life outside of it, try to enjoy things, and not be so afraid that if I try to do this, depression will take it away from me. Maybe it won't. I still can try. And so after 4 months of living in Tyler, healing, I went back to Washington. That's where my husband was, and I went back, and I lived there for 5 more years. In those 5 years, I did not get severely depressed again, but I was maintaining. I was existing and just staying alive, taking care of my daughter and not getting depressed, and that was about all I was doing. I didn't have friends, and I, in 2017, realized I can have more. I'm not happy. I'm barely making it by, and I can have more. And so in 2017, again, I came back to Tyler. I remember I called my mother. I had been in bed crying for 3 days. And I called her just to talk. Mm-hmm. And she told me that she had been in the garden picking green beans. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, oh man, I wish that I was there to eat those green beans. And she said to me, and I mean, this is the only conversation we're having. She just said to me, well, then come home. We had not talked about that I was crying for 3 days or what was going on. She just said, come home. And I said, okay, I will. And I had a ticket to come home later that day. Mm-hmm. And I have not gone back. You know, it was just one of those moments. And so I think what I want to bring up about these things is that in this time period when I didn't know what to do, I followed God's lead. In 2012, I came home because God showed a passage to me that told me to come home. It showed me where I was, and it showed me that I could not survive there, and so I came home. In 2017, God, He made that, He was there in that phone call when I needed to ask to come home, and I didn't want to because of pride, and Mother knew what I was asking, and she answered, and we just did it. And it wasn't a big deal, but it changed my life. And so in these last few years, when I don't know what to do, I pray and I just try to follow where God's leading me. Because 20 years of this, and I still can't answer the question, what's the purpose of this? What does it mean that I have gone through this? What does it mean that I continue to go through this? What does this mean that Mother has to go through this and our whole family? And I don't know. And I might not know. But when I came home in 2017, I asked God, I said, why am I still alive? Why are you making me go through this? Because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my family and you. So why am I here? And it's the only time that I've really felt like God directly spoke to me in words that were not in the Bible. And He said, because I'm not done with you yet. I have no idea what that means, but it was pretty clear. And so in the last few years, the verse that I really cling to is Romans 12:2. It says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. This whole concept of be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that has been the last 8 years for me. It is a transformation of God just changing me, healing me, showing me how to adapt and live a good, full life with depression. And you know, it's been some good years since I've been home. It has. Depression is still always there, but
we've had a good time.
We have.
Well, while Laura Grace was doing this, my story is that basically in 2012, we just did a restart. We start all over again. And then in 2017, we did a restart, and we just go back to the basics. What I remember most about you coming home, both of those times, was the feeling of worthlessness in your life. And I remember when your dad, who always provided so well for us, I gave the time and the energy, but he was there to provide love and the material things needed for all of this. And I can remember he gave you a car, and you just wept and said, I'm not worthy. There was my job. I have to make her realize she is a child of God, and she is worthy. We are all worthy because we are children of God. I needed to help her find her security, again, find her independence in life, and my job was to stay available. Always be there, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever we were called to do, that's what we were going to do to save our child. My worries in those years when she was in Washington State, these were the things I worried about. She's all alone. Yes, she was married and she had a baby, but she was all alone. She didn't have any close friends, no one to help her out like I did. She didn't have any of that kind of relationship. It was just her. And that was a great fear in my life, for you being alone. Another one was that I feared that all she was doing was staying alive. She wasn't accomplishing anything or fulfilling her life in any way. She was simply staying alive. I think that was a true fear that I had. And so my attitude became, keep the door open and keep your mouth closed. Now, I wish I could tell you that as the perfect person, I was able to keep my mouth closed all the time, but I wasn't. We had some words, normal relationship. You see, Laura Grace and I are not alike at all. I'm more conservative. She's much more liberal. There are certain areas that we don't converse about, but that does not change our relationship as mother and daughter. And so even though I didn't agree, she knew where I stood. So I didn't have to explain it. I might not agree with her, but I knew what she was feeling and what she felt. So just keep my mouth shut. And that's my best advice for you. Don't give advice unless it's been asked of you. Just keep your mouth shut and be there. And the verse I prayed through those years was this one, Jeremiah 29:11. I know the thoughts I think toward you, thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. That was my prayer for Laura Grace, that she would have a future and that hope might be restored and replenished in her life. So that's her story, isn't it, Laura Grace? As it is today. Yeah. And you know what? This is a never-ending story. I close with this verse. Let me just say, our mission is to keep moving forward.
Yep.
No matter what or how many times we have to restart, we keep moving forward. For me, it's to be a better mother and continue to make myself better until she becomes my caretaker. And that will happen, probably. Mm-hmm. And for her, it's to be not the best person she could be, but to be the person God wants her to be. And there's a big difference there. A big difference there. So here was the verse that I have in my Bible, and it's for our future, and I have the big word promise written across this verse, and it's Joel 2:25, and it says, I will restore to you the years that the swarming locusts have eaten. And I believe God is faithful, and he will restore to us over and above, as Ephesians says, what we could ask or even think of. He will restore to us all the things that this illness has robbed from us. Thank you so much for being here and listening to us, and I hope in some way we've inspired you to turn to God for all things.
Well, thank you, Laura, Grace, and Cindy, for sharing with us this morning. We are so excited to have the opportunity to share with you online since we can't be meeting in person right now. My name is Taylor Ballou. I'm the Women's Ministry Associate here at Green Acres, and I just wanted to take a minute. If you're at home and you've been watching, maybe stand up, do some stretches, get a drink of water, move around a little bit. Our next speaker is going to really bring in the clinical aspect and share a little bit more with us about how to deal with some of these things if you or someone you know is facing them. I want to shout out our online girls and everyone watching online right now. You may be new to online, but we've had ladies joining us online since the beginning. And so I'm so glad that you are joining us, and they are so excited to have you join us online. I also want to let you know about our discussion aspect of our online Bible study. Since we're not in person, we would normally have table groups, but now we want to have another opportunity to discuss and kind of process what we've learned and what we've talked about this morning. So if you haven't already, join our mental health and emotional wellness Facebook group. You have to request to join, and then we are approving almost immediately. And then after that, about 11 o'clock when we finish, we will be posting the discussion questions. They just post in a typical Facebook post, and then in order to participate in the discussion questions, you will comment your answers, and then feel free to respond to other ladies like you would at any other table group discussion type of setting. So I hope that you will join us for a discussion time there after this. We've also posted a couple of other resources there. I believe we've posted the link to Laura Grace's book if you'd like to order one of those for yourself. So our next speaker is Amy Waters, and as she's coming up to the stage, I want to read her bio to you and give you a little bit more information on who Amy is. So Amy is a licensed professional counselor supervisor. She's a women's Bible study leader, a disciple maker, and self-proclaimed theology junkie. How fun is that? Amy spent nearly 10 years on staff at Pine Cove as a conference director, and it was there that God gave her a passion for ministering to women and families. She earned a master's in marriage and family counseling from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in 2011, and she's currently counseling at Aletheia in Tyler, Texas. Amy is married to Neil Waters, and she is mommy to Sam, who is 7 years old, and Elle, who is 5. What fun ages. Amy and Neil love to spend time working on home projects, serving at Sylvania Church, and being outdoors. When she's not doing that, Amy can be found posting ridiculously adorable pictures of their children and Golden Doodle. So you should really go check that out, because I mean, we're all here for some Golden Doodle pictures. I love that. On social media, and pretending like she's participating in the Great British Bake Off. So I hope that you will enjoy Amy's insight into our mental health and emotional wellness in these next few minutes.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I'm so grateful that there's a Bible study like this. Like Taylor said, I am first and foremost a believer in Jesus Christ, and that's been a huge part of my own story, a huge part of my life, and it's also a huge part of my work. When I went off to college, I went to Howard Payne University for my undergrad. I know there's a few yellow jackets running around here in Tyler, Texas. I really did not know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I loved God and people. So I did a double major in psychology and theology because God and people, that made sense to me. And I didn't really know exactly how God would flesh that out in my life. When I graduated, I went home, actually really just to be with my family. My mom had remarried and had a stepdad and stepbrother and sister that I wanted to know. And so I came back home to really be with them and found myself working for a pregnancy hotline, which was, I learned so much. And then came to Pine Cove in 2002 via just a couple of relationships and friendships, and I spent 10 years on staff at Pine Cove. It's a Christian camp here in the area, and I did family ministry. It was a family camp. During the year, we would do women's conferences, retreats, couples conferences, that kind of thing. And over the course of those 10 years, God began to develop in my heart a desire to really sit with people in their trouble. And so I started my master's degree at Southwestern, actually thinking I would move to Fort Worth, and very shortly after I met my husband, and we ended up still here in Tyler. I've been with Aletheia Family Counseling here in Tyler really even before we called it that. Aletheia is the Greek word for truth. Much like Cindy, I do love to be a truth teller in people's lives. As a therapist, I get to sit with people in what I would just call a sacred space. It's a sacred space to sit and to hear someone's story. It's a sacred space to sit and hear how they feel. I tell my little people, counselors help with three things. We help with big relationships, big decisions, and big emotions. And usually a lot of those are connected together. On a kind of a personal level, as I've been counseling for a while now, I really have found myself loving very much to work with relational dynamics. Not uncommon for me to be working with either a whole family, marriages, even parent-child. I love teenage clients. They're some of my favorites. I also love working with people who've been church hurt. You know that Christian does not always mean kind, and Christian does not always mean easy to relate to. And so it's been a privilege to walk with people when they've been hurt by the church. I also love working with women who have autoimmune disorders. A big part of the health piece for them can be managing stress and maybe even dealing with some trauma. And so part of what I'm going to do today is I kind of want to come on a educational and practical perspective of both anxiety and depression. I got to say it's a tall order to talk about both of these topics from a clinical perspective in a very short amount of time. So I'm going to do my very best to give you kind of the 101, the basics, and some things that maybe will just put some tools in your hands that will be helpful. Before we jump in, I just want to say a word about diagnosing, labels. I love even how Laura Grace shared about being able to disconnect a little bit from the label of depression. Diagnosis is just the art or the act of identifying a disease from its signs and symptoms. In other words, it's just a way to describe in shorthand what's happening to you. I want to share with you a little bit of a way that we talk about this in our office, and we love to give the illustration of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. We know that years ago, someone was digging and they found a fossil of a particular kind, right? And they call a colleague and they say, listen, we've just found this thing. It's got a big head and sharp teeth and short arms and a long tail, and we think it ate meat. And then somewhere another colleague says, hey, we found another one of those big-headed, sharp-teeth, short-armed, long-tailed meat eaters, and another, and another. And finally, they just say, can we just find a way to talk about this thing without having to list out every time that he has a big head and sharp teeth and short arms and a long tail, and he's a meat eater? Let's call him a T-Rex, right? Part of what it does is it gives us a common language that one archaeologist can say to another, hey, I found one of those guys, and he doesn't have to list out all of those things. Well, it's not so different when we're diagnosing a mental illness, that we have attributes or symptoms that we're describing, and that gives up one professional another way to say to a professional, hey, here's what we're looking at, without having to list out the whole thing. So it does give us common language, and it gives us a way to describe what's happening. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell us how we got there. It doesn't tell us why. It doesn't tell us what that person needs or how it's going to be best treated. I do find that people are very unique in that way, that we're a unique combination of design, just our makeup. I tend to see that those who struggle with anxiety and depression also tend to be very sensitive, very intelligent, very thoughtful, and maybe sometimes the underbelly of that is a tendency toward anxiety or depression. We're also biologically uniquely made. You know, in the same way that sometimes pancreases don't work and we need insulin, sometimes the brain or hormones or those kinds of things aren't working and we need help. We're also a unique combination of design, story, belief that's all wrapped up together. And so I do believe that diagnoses make terrible identities. I don't care how daunting the label is. The sum of who you are as a person is not limited to what happens to ail you. I do believe that we are people, that we are image bearers, that we bear God's image back to him, and that part of just living in a fallen world means people get sick, and sometimes that means the brain gets sick too. So I wanted to say that before we kind of start, because I'm going to throw some labels or some diagnoses at you today. But I want you to understand that it's a way to describe what's happening. But I think the way that we get out is complex and unique, and we need to keep that in mind. The other thing I think that's just kind of an interesting thing for me is, how do I integrate my belief? I am a self-proclaimed theology junkie. I do love to read all kinds of things, but I am a studier of God's word. And so as I sought out to do therapy of some kind, I really kind of had to think through, what do I do with this? As I'm learning all kinds of different theories or therapies or interventions, what do I do with that as a believer? And I got to tell you, as a believer, I see Jesus as integrated into all of my life. Part of how I see family, marriage, work, friendship, community, the body, it's all connected to the way that he created us and what he has set out. And so that is absolutely integrated into my work. Now, here's what I don't do. I don't require all of my clients to be believers. That's not when they walk in, I'm not going to beat them with the Bible or expect a certain thing. But as a believer, my framework and my way of viewing people is very connected to the way that God made us and what he's laid out for us in his word. Psychology, interestingly enough, comes from two Greek words, psyche, which means soul, and logos, which you've probably heard a time or three, which means word. And so all psychology is a word about the soul. And soul care belonged to the church for a very, very long time before we had the likes of Freud or Rogers or Jung or some of the guys that came along and made observations. Now, listen, this is me embracing Calvin's notion that all truth is God's truth, even when godless men find it. And so they observe things about the world that are true, although at times maybe not complete. And so as I studied those things, I wanted to filter those under the umbrella of God's word. But I do find that there are a lot of things found out there, maybe outside of the church, that are very useful and helpful, and so I use them in my practice. The Old Testament word for the soul, I wanted us to kind of talk through this a little bit, because psychology is soul care at its fundamental level. It's a way to take care of the self. The Old Testament word is such a fun, complex, rich word. If you're a word study person, I would love to send you on a little rabbit trail to study this word. It's called the nephesh. The nephesh it's defined as soul, life, will, breath, person, desire, emotion, body, or whole being. The soul is the very essence of our existence, the seat of human emotion and desire, the whole self. And while the scriptures do distinguish between heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? We even hear in the Shema, and we hear Jesus echo this in the Great Command, that we should love the Lord with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. There's a distinguishing character there, but the biblical thinker never disconnects them. They're interwoven together, body, soul, spirit, and we don't separate the two. In fact, we often will see, you've probably had this experience, that sometimes when the body suffers, then so does the spirit. Or maybe it happens the other way around. I'm discouraged and my heart is heavy, and then my body starts to respond to that. A couple things we see in the scriptures about the soul is that it kind of takes on a life of its own. The soul gets thirsty. That's Psalm 42:2. My soul thirsts for the living God. The soul gets hungry. Psalm 63:5-8. My soul is satisfied as with a rich feast. The soul gets tired. That's Psalm 62:1, that my soul finds rest, right? When do we need rest? When we're tired. In God alone, or maybe in Psalm 23, we read about the restoring of the soul. It can be afraid or overwhelmed, troubled, in danger, downcast. You have some of these on your handout. My soul is greatly troubled, or my soul was in the midst of lions. And this is the word, when you're reading the word, especially as you walk through the Psalms, the word is nephesh. So sometimes you even have a guy like David who is talking to his own soul. Why are you downcast, soul? Why are you troubled within me? He's saying, why are you downcast, nephesh? Why are you troubled within me? And then he tells himself to hope in God again. So the soul in the scriptures take on this whole picture. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more and more in the world of counseling and psychology is that the body and soul are intrinsically connected. I do think, too, that it's an old Gnostic heresy. I didn't write this in the handout, but it's an old Gnostic heresy that the body is one thing and the soul is the other. In fact, even in talking about Jesus, we have old heresies that would try to separate the two, as if Jesus was a soul, but he didn't really have flesh, or that he was flesh, but he didn't really have a soul. And part of what some of the earliest apologetics were kind of talking about even the nature of who Jesus was. And I think a really great way to think about this, I'm shamelessly stealing this from a dear friend of mine. We just had a discussion, and she made a great point, and I wanted to share it with you. If what happened in Jesus's body matters, and I think we can make a great case that what happened in Jesus's body matters, that's true for us too, that what happens in our body is significant. You've probably heard a lot of discussion. It turns out that all our crazy plexus friends were onto something, that there's this gut-brain axis, right? That there is a connection between even our digestive system and our brain. So it kind of refers to this two-way connection and communication between the gut and the brain, and what's happening in the gut can directly influence the brain, and what's happening in the brain can directly influence the gut. Have you ever felt that way where you go, I'm just sick about this, right? We mean that, don't we? When we have had an experience where I'm troubled, that we literally feel it in our body and we might literally feel sick about it. Well, part of that is because it's connected. I saw that wonderful little clip by Dr. Leaf that our thoughts have biological realities. We'll talk about this when we talk about some of the things that we can do on a practical level, but part of what we see is that even the attitude of gratefulness reduces our anxiety. That there's tons of studies that show us that practicing thankfulness and gratitude actually can reduce the physical symptoms of anxiety. Isn't that amazing? Neuroplasticity tells us that change is possible, that you're not stuck. We even, I've gone down a little rabbit hole in the world of epigenetics. Part of that is raising a daughter who has some unique health things going on. And part of that is just me up in the middle of the night reading things. But epigenetics tells us that even through environment and lifestyle, we can change even the way the genes express themselves. So where we might be born with a particular tendency, that through behaviors, environment, all those kinds of things, we can kind of switch those things on and off. Isn't that amazing? Ladies, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And my heart sings that more and more the more I learn about the way God made us. So I want to share with you a couple of things just about anxiety in general, depression in general, and then I want to give you a couple of coping skills just that I think are helpful. So one, in the world of anxiety is the mind and body's reaction to stressful, dangerous, or unfamiliar situations. Anxiety is normal. I'm a little troubled. I think in our culture, we're starting to pathologize negative emotion. And negative emotion is a part of life. We all have experienced the feeling of anxiety from time to time. It's that sense of uneasiness. I gotta tell you, on the way over here today, when I found out I was gonna be speaking to a virtually empty room, although there's some beautiful few faces here in the room I'm very happy to have, I got a little nervous. I'm an extrovert. I love the energy of people. Part of what I do when I'm in an office is I'm engaging in a personal interaction, and I love it. And so I felt a little uneasy about the idea of speaking in the Green Acres Sanctuary, right? That's a very normal thing when we have a significant event. Don't you remember the first day of school, the first day of a job, the first day in a new place, or walking into somewhere you've never been before? We kind of feel that a little bit. And anxiety to some degree helps us stay alert. right? We've all had this experience. You hold a baby in your arms and you think, oh gosh, I hope I don't drop this thing. And of course, we just kind of pay a little more attention. We hold a little bit tighter. And in some ways, it keeps us aware and alert in what we're doing. But for people suffering from an anxiety disorder, you've got to understand it can feel far from normal. It goes beyond the realm of that normal feeling of anxiety that we all experience, and it begins to react to all the potential things that could be stressful, dangerous, or unfamiliar, or it begins to see ordinary things as if they were stressful, dangerous, or unfamiliar. And then the body responds. So we have a couple of kinds of anxiety disorders that we see in our office. One is just what we would call a generalized anxiety disorder, that we have a sense of anxiety. It's probably the most common diagnosis that you see, although often linked to other diagnoses. And part of what we see is just kind of this sense of mind racing, maybe a sense of dread or worry. Although I wouldn't necessarily say it's only worry, sometimes it's just the sense that something's wrong or the sense that things are not okay. And it takes on a very physical nature. You can have racing thoughts. You can begin to sweat. Your heartbeat will race. Sometimes people will talk about a tightness in their chest or in their stomach. Most people can tell you where in the body they feel anxiety. Sometimes they're clenching their jaw, or they're tensed up in their muscles, their neck, their back. Maybe they're having a hard time focusing, or maybe we're starting to obsess about things or worry about things excessively. And so it's hard to know sometimes what came first, the chicken or the egg. Did I start to worry myself sick, or am I sick and now I worry? It's kind of hard to know. My son, he's 7, Sam, when he started kindergarten, he woke up on the first day of school and he came out and he said, "Mom, I'm sick." And I was like, oh boy, we're starting kindergarten and here we are, anxiety rears its ugly head. And I said, well, baby doll, are you sick or are you sick with worry? And he said, Mom, I'm sick and I'm sick with worry. And I was like, okay. Well, I took his temperature and he had kind of a 99 on the nose. And I'm like, well, you can worry yourself into a small fever. I don't know. What is it? So I take him to school and I tell the teacher what's going on. It's the very first day, brand new school, brand new class. And about an hour later, I get a call and they said, well, he has a fever. You've got to come get him. And sweet thing, he was not wrong. He was both sick and sick with worry. And bless him, I should have listened. But sometimes in terms of where does this start, it's hard to know. We can start to see even more specific anxieties, like for example with phobias. We certainly kind of have those very stereotypical, I'm a phobia of snakes or a phobia of spiders. A phobia is not just a fear. A phobia can start to be disruptive and it believes that things are disasters when they're not disasters. And it really can cause you to avoid. That's what we most commonly see is someone avoiding something because they're so fearful. Last summer, I had a young lady working through a needle phobia, and it was causing her to not get treatment that she needed for a physical condition because she was so terrified of needles. The idea of drawing blood was just impossible. She'd pass out. So we spent the whole summer doing exposure therapy, and we just wore out the topic of needles. We watched videos, we looked at pictures, now this is kind of non-traditional in the therapy world, but we ended by a trip to Carter Blood Care and she watched me give blood. And she did it. I got an email from her earlier this year and she said that she had been able to go and get some of the treatment that she needed because she'd worked through the stress of that phobia. Phobias can be very, very debilitating. Social anxiety disorder. Again, I think this is different than maybe what I would just call being an introvert. I think most introverts feel a sense of dread or maybe anticipation with a social encounter. But people with a social anxiety have a huge fear of either being judged or just paid attention to. It's kind of that feeling, remember when we were in junior high and you walk in and you think the whole room's looking at you? It's just that never goes away. maybe even the idea of speaking up or giving voice. It's not uncommon for someone with social anxiety to sit in the car and never get out, or to feel fear to such a degree that they come home and they're evaluating every sentence. Did that come across weird? How did that go? And I think it's beyond the world of shy. It begins to even say, you know what? I don't got to go to, I'm not going to go into church. That's fine. It's okay. I'll just go home. When I stop doing the things that I want to do or I know I need to do because of a fear, we've now crossed into what we'll call a clinical anxiety. Obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, I think there's a whole world of stereotypes connected to OCD. We think of kind of the stereotypical hand washing or counting or maybe locking and unlocking doors. But OCD can kind of manifest itself in a number of ways. I'll tell you one that I'm seeing in the world of Christianity and in the church is what we would call a scrupulosity OCD. It's this fear of not being right. Someone with a scrupulosity OCD has this sense of guilt even when they've not done something wrong, or a sense of I'm a horrible person and I'm going to go to hell, even though they know the work that Jesus did on the cross, that has nothing to do with their work and what they do or they don't, but they just can't believe that God has good things for them. So you might see maybe some over confession, or someone who's getting rededicated once every couple months, or someone who is just can't, even though they've confessed and they've repented and they're walking in righteousness and memorizing scriptures, that they can't get rid of that sense of guilt. You might have someone who has a scrupulosity type of OCD. What OCD is connected to is to two things, right? Obsessions. It's a pattern of thinking that I ruminate over and over and over again and I can't get rid of. And then a compulsion is the need to do something to make the anxiety go away. And so part of how we treat that can be through one direction or the other, which I love, that we can address the patterns of thinking, but we can also address how not to give over to the behavior. We also have post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know that a lot of people know that that's actually classified as an anxiety disorder. And this is really connected to when we've experienced an event that was traumatic. Most typically, you hear about that with people who've served in the military or maybe seen death. We've got our public health workers, people who drive ambulances, firefighters, doctors, ER doctors, any kind of caretaker. We can even have what we'll call secondary trauma, and you can have PTSD from taking care of people. I think we can have relational PTSD, that sometimes we grow up in a home that is so dysfunctional and disruptive that the trauma is relational. And people with PTSD are most vulnerable to daily stress because part of what it does is creates the sense that the trauma hasn't stopped. So one of the things that happens with PTSD is they have a really very real, very difficult, very traumatic event, and then their brain doesn't turn off. So when that switch gets flipped up, of course, they're in real present danger, so they are anxious about that, because you should be. When you're in real and present danger, anxiety serves us, right? Blood starts pumping to your lungs, you breathe, and part of that means is that I can either fight or I can run, which are the two things that I need to survive. But with PTSD, the fight or flight doesn't go away. It doesn't change. And so one of the things that we can do is both address things in the heart and in the body that help give a sense of calm so that you don't feel like the trauma continues. And then we have panic disorder. Panic disorders are when we are reacting to a fear or a situation when there's no real and present danger. And so it's kind of the sense of I'm in trouble or I'm really in danger when there's not a present danger. This is where we start to see things like panic attacks. And ladies, you probably have heard someone talk about this, or maybe you know that sometimes people show up at the ER having a panic attack because it's so very physical in the way that it manifests itself that sometimes people believe they're having a heart attack, show up at the ER and they go, no, it's just a panic attack. By the way, attaching just to a panic attack is so not seeing how it is. They're very scary and they can be very unsettling. But even some of the things that we feel in our bodies can translate to what we believe to be true about the world. Okay, so that's kind of a big overview of what are some of the things that we may see in a counseling office with regard to anxiety. Depression is actually one of the most common mental illnesses today. Sometimes people even call it the common cold of mental disorders. But again, I think that doesn't give accurate language to what people are experiencing with depression. Again, I think most of us have felt that feeling of being pressed, right? That's where the picture of depression comes from, is when I push down on something and then it leaves kind of a mark there, where we feel not just sad. I think sad is sometimes a part of depression, but sometimes what we feel is angry. Or sometimes what we feel is what I'll just call the great nothing. I think one of the things that can be so hard about depression is that you can find yourself feeling numb or struggling to feel at all. Or maybe what sometimes people will describe this great heaviness or this weight, where day-to-day activities start to take on a whole different kind of energy draw. That sometimes just the act of getting out of bed, getting in the shower, making breakfast, and grabbing a seat, and I'm spent. And we know that we're walking through depression when it starts to feel like everything is trudging through mud. So one of the things that we'll see with depression is some of the physical signs. Maybe we'll stop eating, we're eating more, we're eating less. We're sleeping more, we're sleeping less. We'll see great changes in mood. We'll see great change even in the things that we want to do, that maybe you're someone who loves to get up and get out, and then all of a sudden you're like, I just don't feel like it anymore. I think in some ways depression begins to steal color from the world that you're in, that the things that normally are a delight to you, things that normally feel really good, just stop feeling really good. And so part of what happens is because so much energy is being spent, we just kind of stop. So there's this great stop. So with major depressive disorder, again, I think this is one of the most common diagnoses, but often can be connected to other things. We also have dysthymic disorder, which is maybe less severe, but more persistent. It's kind of this melancholy that never leaves. And so we're not going to necessarily see the great disruptions that we do with major depressive disorder, but it has a sense of it doesn't ever leave me. With bipolar disorder, we see more of a swing. Then we have two types of bipolar disorder. And one kind of makes these major swings. So we'll swing really low for a season and we'll be in kind of a season of depression. And then we swing really high. And so in a mania, someone might have all kinds of wonderful ideas that they're going to start a business. They might sell their house. They might not sleep for days. They might really kind of have an energy, or almost like they're buzzing or they can't stop. The second kind of bipolar, we swing low and the mania is not quite so high. And so maybe we're more just peppy and energetic and maybe lots of great ideas, but not necessarily into the not sleeping or that kind of thing. And then with the cyclothymic disorder, it's like bipolar, but much like the dysthymic disorder, it's more just what you would call, I'm just moody. I swing a lot. I'm up, I'm down, I'm up, I'm down, but maybe don't feel the kind of the poles. That's why we call it bipolar, because we kind of ride the poles. With postpartum depression, there's usually this very unhappy mix of a great change in life. Anyone who's brought a baby home, you've just experienced a great change in life. Hormones, which can be very cruel to us on a normal basis. And then it's a baby blues that settles in to stay, right? Most of us have a little bit of that baby blues when we come home the first couple weeks. We've got to adjust. We've got to figure out what our new normal is going to look like. But when we settle into postpartum depression and it's not treated with, it increases, it stays, it gets heavier and heavier, and our thinking gets disrupted. And sometimes we start thinking like really just scary things, like this child would be better off without me, or maybe it'd be better if we were all gone, or things that can be really disturbing and scary. We also have premenstrual premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Ladies, this is just for us. That sometimes with that mix of hormones can be kind of a settling into just a very low depression, and it comes on a monthly basis. Seasonal affective disorder. You heard Laura Grace talk a little bit about her experience with that when she moved to Washington. It turns out that we need sunshine. that part of why God gives us light, even physically gives us light, is that it's helpful for the body. And some of us are more sensitive to that than others. And so when we've been in a season where we're not in the light a lot, people who work nights can have trouble with this. People who live in places that are just rainy or dark. When you get into some places where you go that they've got daylight hours are just a few hours, and then nighttime comes in during certain seasons of the year. But also people who are just indoors. I think one of the things that we're seeing just culturally is that we're indoors a whole lot, and people aren't getting the kind of light that they need. We're getting a lot of blue light from screens and not a lot of natural light. And then we have an atypical depression where depression kind of starts to take on, I have some features of depression and then some features of something else, or maybe I don't follow all the standard criteria for depression. I think we typically see in men that men don't get sad or low, they get angry. And so I always know when a man is coming into my office and they're saying, I just am mad all the time, a little flag goes up that I go, I need to assess to see if we're dealing with depression. So I wanted to just introduce you to some of that language. Just one, when we start to come out of the world of what I would just call normal negative emotions, and we are in the place of this is beginning to disrupt my functioning. I find that my thinking is off in some way. I'm not doing the things that I would normally do. That might be time. And we'll talk about this in a minute, that when do I reach out? When do I ask for help? I think there's a lot of times that we, especially as believers, because we know God's word to be sufficient, we know that he is, Christ has purchased for us all good things, that we may start to think that means we don't need anything else. And I got to tell you that I think that's just a poor way of thinking about it. We would never do that to someone who had cancer. We would never do that to someone who was struggling with diabetes. We would get them the treatment that they need. And I think because it's connected to the heart and the mind and the soul, we start to think, well, take 2 Bible verses and call me in the morning. I didn't put this on your recommended reading, but if you wanted to just, have some Google fun later, Tommy Nelson talks about this. He's a pastor at Denton Bible Church, or he was at the time, and he talks about his own experience with depression. And he would have been the pastor to say, hey, read these scriptures, until he experienced a very physical depression that actually came from a disobedience to God's command to rest. He had filled his life with really good things, a discipleship program, his church. He was doing the Song of Solomon series, so college students everywhere were flocking to hear the pastor talk about sex. He really was doing a lot of great things, but he was not resting. And eventually his body said, enough. And anyways, I won't tell his story. Look it up. It's really fascinating. He talks about his own experience with a physical depression. I wanted us to shift and maybe talk about some of the things that God has given us that help us heal. And I've kind of categorized this on your handout in heart, mind, body, spirit, but I want you to understand that there's several of these that are linked together. So for example, when we're talking about something like meditation, right? That may be something that feeds my spirit. If I'm going to meditate on the word of God, or I'm going to think about truths or think about his person or his character, that I may take a physical posture with that I may sit, or I may kind of get myself in a place of relaxing, and I'm engaging my mind and my heart as I do that. Does that make sense? So I've categorized these, but I want you to know that even as I've done that, I realize that several of these weave through together. So with regard to the heart, one, I want to encourage you to tell your story. One of the things that we're starting, we've known this for a while, but we're starting to see more and more, is that when you sit with someone who's compassionate, who cares about you and is ready to hear, and you share what's going on in your heart, that actually literally changes your brain. There was a study several years ago. They were doing PET scans of people who had trauma, and the first time someone talked about their trauma, that it lit up in all the ways that you expect a brain to light up with trauma, right? The fight or flight response, there were certain places, and every time they told the story again to someone who cared about them and where they were safe and where they felt heard and loved, the brain begins to change. And the PET scans begin to light up differently. Isn't that amazing? I think it's a gift. I get to give this gift on a regular basis as a therapist for someone to come and sit and tell their story, and that they know that when they walk into my office that I care about them because they're mine. I just that's my approach is you walk into my office, you're mine. And because I'm ready to hear, and that actually makes a difference. I had a lady years ago, she said to me, I feel like I tell the same stories over and over and over again. And I said, well, maybe you need to. Tell me again. Tell me that story again. And part of why I did that is because I know it's good for her to tell her story with someone who cares about her and where she's safe. I think identifying emotions, it can be an interesting thing. I think we like to put things in categories. I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm frustrated. If you're a teenager, you say it's weird or awkward. But it can be really helpful to begin to identify the emotions. No, I was just really disappointed. Or, wow, I felt embarrassed. And so I responded to that. And so sometimes even just tending to your own soul and sitting down and going, what was it that I was feeling, I think can be helpful. I put on here the idea of the lament. I know Debbie has mentioned that she's studying the Psalms. I love that. I think we should all engage in a good study of the Psalms from time to time. We have several different kinds of Psalms, and one of them is the lament. We don't do this very well in modern American Christianity. We have a few songs, right? We sing, "Blessed be the name of the Lord," or we sing, "It is well with my soul." But we don't usually join hands across the aisle and sing about how I'm so troubled and where were you, God, when the evildoer came in, or we don't always have a language for those kinds of things. And one of the things that we see in a lament is a very specific structure. There's an outpouring of the heart. That's Psalm 62:8. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. That we have an opportunity to say, what is this like? The Psalms use beautiful language. Sometimes David goes full melancholy. I'm like a solitary bird. Or he'll say things like, my tears are my only food. And haven't we been there? I sure can't eat, but I can cry. I'm kind of the opposite, actually. I can't cry, but I can eat. But in that sense of this is what it feels like to be in this season. I feel all alone. I feel like help will never come. But there's always a but God kind of moment in a lament. There's a shift to either remembering his character in the story of God's people, remembering something in our own lives. So there's kind of this structure of the outpouring of the heart and then remembering God. And I think as believers, we sometimes skip straight to that let's remember God part, and we forget the invitation to lament, that there's an invitation to grieve and weep and mourn. Community and friendship. You want to talk about a really great serotonin builder. Sometimes getting eyeball to eyeball with someone and just spending time with them and encouraging them is good for your heart. I got to tell you, I get concerned in the middle of social distancing that the isolation is going to start to affect people in really difficult ways. And I get it, I understand, but there's this little bit of me that goes, oh, that disconnection can be so painful. I think the posture of delighting in things. When God says, delight yourself in the Lord, that's given as a directive, as if that's something that we can do, not just something that happens to us. I think art is a way to engage both the body and the heart and the mind and the spirit, to gather them all together. With the mind challenging beliefs, I want to give you very quickly what I'll call the ABCs of emotion. A is the activator, right? There's this event, this thing that happens. And C is our consequence, how I feel or what I do. And there's this little thing in between that I think makes a big impact. So I always give the illustration of driving down the road. I like to give the illustration of driving down South Broadway. That's where my office is, for those of you that are in Tyler. And it's notoriously busy and notoriously stop and go traffic and notoriously frustrating. And so let's just imagine you're driving down the road, a vehicle pulls out in front of you, slams on his brakes. How do you feel? It's a near miss, right? I might feel afraid. I might feel angry. I always ask, are you a honker? I won't tell you which one I am. Okay. Same situation. Vehicle pulls out in front of you, slams on his brakes. It's a near miss. It's an ambulance. Are you still angry? Part of why we see those differently is that in one scenario, we may believe, I know typically for me, it's pay attention, get off your phone. But in the other, I believe that maybe I was in the wrong. I should have seen this. I should have gotten out of the way. And that actually changes what we think and what we feel. The belief matters. And so the D there is to deal with not the activator, not the event. Most of us have very little control over the events and the things that are happening to us. Although I will say sometimes we invite our own pain. But we can deal with the belief. Now listen, I'm not going to encourage you to believe false things to make yourself feel better. If what is true is distressing, then go on and be distressed. If what is true is sad, then you go on and weep. If what is true maybe makes you feel a negative thing, you don't have to dodge that or run from it. But I will say more times than not, we've got a false belief at play that's causing us to feel things that we don't need to feel. And so I want to encourage you to challenge your beliefs. Memorizing scripture, writing out thoughts, reading. Listen, I'm a huge fan of picking up a book and reading it. I think even making statements of faith, I realized as I put that down that people might pull out like the statement of faith from their church. Those are great. I think what I mean is saying statements of faith. God, I know you're here. You've promised that you will never leave, that your spirit has gone with me. You've given me a helper, right? Statements of faith. I'm a huge fan of journaling. When I have someone who's dealing with anxiety, one of the first things I will prescribe is a brain dump every night before you go to bed, because part of what that does is it gives those thoughts somewhere to go. And I find that sometimes if they're on paper, then my brain doesn't feel like they have to play with them so much. And so writing those things down. I'm going to speed up because we're getting very close to time, and so hang with me. With the body, breathing, okay, a quick word about breathing. When God creates all of humanity, right, everything else in the world, he says, let it be. Let there be light, let there be land, let there be birds in the air and creatures on the field, and he forms man, and when he gives him life, how does he do it? He breathes, right? And when our hearts are transformed by the gospel, it is done by the work of the holy pneuma, the holy breath, the Holy Spirit of God. And so why would it be any different that a little tiny illustration of God's life-giving attributes be given when we breathe? So one of the things you'll hear every therapist do, Christian or not, is when you're dealing with anxiety and depression, they're going to teach you how to breathe. Well, part of that is because I think God still gives us life through his holy pneuma, but he also gives us life through the literal breath he puts in our lungs. Breathe. Learn to breathe. Moving our bodies, muscle relaxing. Mindfulness. Now, I'm going to quick note on mindfulness because I don't want you to freak out about that word. I think people hear that word and they kind of think like Eastern weird, out there kinds of things. All mindfulness is the practice of being present. It's the practice of reflecting the I am of God who stays in the moment. He joins us, even though he supersedes time, he interacts with us in the present. And so mindfulness causes us to come out of our head and into our bodies and to be present where we are. We do that through the 5 senses, right? What I see, what I hear, what I taste, what I touch. That's why kids love fidget spinners and little squeezy toys and that kind of thing. They can be anxiety reducing because they bring you back into your body. You should have another handout that has the anxiety coping skills. Those skills are also helpful for depression. I should have changed that to say both, but there are some things in there that will help you with mindfulness. Eating good food, sleeping and rest. Okay, the spirit. I want to say really quickly, we've lost some spiritual disciplines that have for a long time been connected to the church, and we're not doing them near as much. The idea of prayer, guided prayer, intentional prayer, even meditation. Again, I think people hear that word and they kind of get a little wigged out by the idea of meditation. All meditation is a fixed focus on something. And so we meditate on God's word. We can meditate on his character, his presence. We can even look at creation and admire his handiwork. And right, the heavens declare the glory of God, and we see the glory of God in creation. Gratitude, we've mentioned that. Service. I think one of the best things to do when we're imploding is to get out. And so sometimes being able to focus on someone else or something else can be so good. The practice of stillness or silence or even solitude. Those are Christian disciplines we've practiced for thousands of years that I find in our current culture we're just not doing very well. And incidentally, they're good for us. So as we wrap up, I want to encourage you to, that in the world of counseling or even seeking out professional care, you don't have to be in a tough place to come seek counseling. In the mental health world, there is room for both health and sick care. So I'm going to just say, come anytime, please. This is on my personal website, but it says, where there is no guidance, a people fall, but in an abundance of counselors, there's safety. That's in Proverbs 11. I think it's always wise for us to seek counsel. But what do I do when I'm really in a tough place? How do I know when I'm a place where I really should seek counseling? One is, am I doing all I know to do and I'm still not finding relief? Right? That's time to just enlist a team. And by the way, what a beautiful thing to hear Cindy and Laura Grace talk about their journey. There's always a team. When someone finds health, and really finds healing, there's almost always more than one person, right? There's community coming alongside of us in some way. Is my daily functioning disrupted or impaired? Does someone I know loves me and cares for me expressing concern? Are they saying, hey, I think you should talk to someone about that? Are my emotions overwhelming to me? This is a good one. Am I having a hard time connecting head and heart? Right? I'm reading the scriptures, I'm practicing, I'm challenging my beliefs, I'm doing these things, but my heart just doesn't buy it. That would be a great time to seek counseling. As we close, I want to close us in a prayer from one of my favorite little prayer books called The Valley of Vision, and that's how we'll wrap up today. But I want to encourage you to, because that was a very breakneck tour of anxiety and depression. I want to encourage you to keep learning. And if you feel like you could answer one of those questions in the affirmative, please reach out. I think counseling can be such a good, healthy, and helpful thing. And so as we wrap up today, I want to read this prayer. And so maybe even where you are, I want you to close your eyes and maybe just hear and agree with this prayer. Giver of all good, streams upon streams of love overflow my path. You've made me out of nothing. You recalled me from a far country. You translated me from ignorance to knowledge, from darkness to light, from death to life, from misery to peace, from folly to wisdom, from error to truth, from sin to victory. Thanks be to God for my high and holy calling. I bless you for ministering angels, for the comfort of your word, the ordinance of your church, the teaching of your spirit, your holy sacraments, the communion of saints, the Christian fellowship, for recorded annals of holy lives, for examples sweet to allure, for beacons sad to deter. Your will is in all your provisions to enable me to grow in grace and to be meet for your eternal presence. My heaven-born faith gives promise of eternal sight, my new birth a pledge of never-ending life. I draw near to you, knowing you will draw near to me. I ask of you, believing that you've already given. I entrust to you, for you have redeemed me. I bless and adore you, eternal God, for the comfort of these thoughts and the joy of these hopes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. I hope that you will reach out to her. We are so delighted. I learned so much today. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and your perspective and insight with us. We'll post Amy's information and details on our website. We'll know you want to take advantage of that. Also, if you were in, I believe, our third week of study, you received a free counseling gift card. This is the gift that we have for you if you've been a part of our group. We partnered together with GraceWorks Counseling and are able to provide you one free counseling session. Since we're not meeting together, you can contact Mimi Youngblood or contact anyone on our website, post on our Facebook page, and we will help get you this particular card. That's about $110 value, I believe, on the street, but we want to express our desire to reach out and to help and open doors so that you can connect with someone who can speak truth into your life, just like those that have done that this for us today. Well, the Bible says in Isaiah 58, verse 11, this is from the Message, the Bible says, I will give you a full life in the emptiest of places. And only the Lord can do that. Psalm 68 says that He crowns the year with a bountiful harvest. Even the hard places yield an abundance. So as we begin to start our discussion time together, I just ask right now that you would be transparent. Maybe post anything on the site, a question that you might have that we could answer, any direction that you might be seeking. But we'll have table leaders that will begin to facilitate the discussion. You don't have to go to a different group. Just stay right there where you are in our group. Now, let me give you your homework assignment. We're studying through the workbook, the resource, Stuck by Jenny Allen. So this week, you'll be working through pages 91 through 107. So jot yourself a note about that. This week, we'll begin to work through page 91 through 107. This week, we'll be looking at being overwhelmed. One of the greatest definitions I've ever heard on depression is when you no longer care about what you care about. So if you'll just do a little self-evaluation right here where you are. There are two great loves that I have in my life. I care about my family and I care about women's ministry. I love those two very much. Obviously, the Lord is a part of that, but the practical things that I'm involved in. My family, women's ministry. So when I found myself some years ago at a place where I no longer cared about, my family is coming in asking what's for dinner. I don't know, whatever you can grab, I guess. When I no longer cared about, I knew that I needed some intervention from a counselor that was very, very beneficial to me. So we will be hanging out online with you, but we want to have a time where we start our discussion. We pray that today's information, it's been a lot to take in, so go back through your notes. We pray that it will be helpful and beneficial, valuable, and this is a great place to have healthy conversations about hard things. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back here live next Tuesday, 9:30 to 11:30, and we will send you an email if you have registered for our class that has the link to this video, all the handouts, or please join us at greenacreswomen.org for all the resources that will be of help to you. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.